Welcome back to Supersymmetry. In the last episode, we completed the primitive age, obtained a primitive blast furnace, and smelted up steel. Now we will begin our trek through the steam age in order to obtain our first LV circuit. With that being said, the first step was to obtain the small steam solid fuel boiler, which required some bronze plates and bricks. Now that I had the boiler, I could begin the production of steam that I could use to power a multitude of basic machines. So I began setting up the boiler near my water pump. I then crafted some pipes to transfer water to the boiler, using up copious amounts of the not-so-trivial bronze. Before fueling the boiler, I decided it was best to build my first bronze machine, the alloy smelter, as it would allow me to manufacture bronze at a much cheaper rate. I also didn't want the steam gathering into the machines and exploding, which isn't actually a problem that happens. Once obtained, I went outside and hooked the machines up, fueling the boiler. However, it did not begin to make steam immediately as it required some time to warm up. After, I decided the area needed some home improvement, so I gave it a floor and lit it up, arguably the most important thing that happens in this video. Meanwhile, I knew that obtaining as much steel as fast as possible would be essential to the progression, so I switched from making charcoal in my coke ovens to making coke, which can smelt one steel ingot in a ludicrous 6 seconds. I had also decided to build a second PBF, so using a mix of resources I had left over from the last one, and some clay and sand gathered using new bronze tools I crafted from the alluring alloy smelter bronze, I quickly assembled one. I had come upon a minor problem in my steelworking endeavors, however. As my coke ovens were filling up with creosote, I had no good way to empty them. Thankfully, GregTech also has liquid steam boilers which conveniently enough could use creosote as fuel. The liquid boiler required glass to make, and unlike vanilla Minecraft, its production was not as easy as simply smelting sand. Instead, I had to mix flint dust with quartz sand, then smelt the resulting glass dust in an alloy smelter. Thankfully, none of these components were annoying to get, and I quickly obtained the liquid boiler. Afterwards, I hooked the boiler up to the steam pipes and began moving my coke ovens to the surface where they could automatically dump their creosote into my boiler. This required an output hatch, but thankfully it was very inexpensive. I also built a buffer tank out of treated wood to store the creosote, as my 4 ovens would have far exceeded my puny boiler's burn rate. My next goal was the steam forge hammer, as it would provide better ingot to plate ratios. However, it required an anvil to craft. The anvil requires iron blocks which could only be made in the steam compressor, so I'd have to build it first. Before that though, I made my first steam piston, a component required for a large number of steam machines. I then crafted both the steam compressor and steam forge hammer. The next step towards LV was obtaining rubber. Firstly, I had to craft a steam latex collector to extract liquid latex from rubber trees. Conveniently though, it just needed rubber tree logs, so I didn't actually have to put a tree in the middle of my base. Here's where things start getting weird. You see, Supersymmetry is very much still early in development, and while that does mean that the pack has an active community, it also means it has some bugs and other issues. The coagulation tank is a massive one. You see, while its quest does not require LV circuits, it does in order to operate. This also leads into the larger issue of processing liquid latex into rubber, as coagulating it into a solid is not an option. I only realized this after I built it, which led to me spending a large amount of time researching alternate methods of obtaining rubber later on. Ignoring that though, I didn't build the tank immediately, and instead opted to build a macerator that could double my ore output, as the amount of bronze I was using kept increasing. The macerator would crush one ore into 2 crushed ores, which could be hammered into impure dusts to be purified then smelted. A major component of the electric circuit was the vacuum tube, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, a vacuum in a tube. Unlike usual GregTech though, I would have to pull a vacuum while assembling it, which I think is pretty cool. The first thing I needed to make one was red alloy, a combination of redstone and copper. Now, let me tell you, the redstone vein I found was zonked out. Like when hovering over the vein with a prospector, I was pretty much tripping trying to read all the ores in it. Nevertheless, obtaining the redstone itself was a pretty trivial task. Back on the rubber front, I constructed the coagulation tank and spent a ludicrous amount of time trying to get it to work, which it didn't, as we already know. I then constructed the vulcanizing press, admitting that the tank would not work, and I had to turn the liquid latex directly into rubber. Latex needed to be mixed with sulfur to make rubber, and in order to obtain sulfur, I had to craft yet another steam machine, this one being the steam roaster, which was essentially a reaction oven. With that in hand, I could produce the sulfur from pyrite dust, but that was currently being processed in my macerator. In the meantime, I crafted a high-pressure liquid boiler in order to keep up with the enormous steam demands of my ever-growing factory. Afterwards, I produced the sulfur and attempted to make some latex. Sadly, these attempts were unsuccessful, but I'll get to that later. As first off, I began crafting fine wires out of red alloy for vacuum tube assemblies and crafting glass tubes for the vacuum tubes themselves. Now, the rubber problem. You see, another dev oversight is that there was no way to make rubber without the catalyst, something that would normally be optional. However, a lot of these catalysts required LV machines to make, but rubber was required to get those machines, a classic catch-22. Thankfully, this seemed to be a common problem, as when searching for the only ore I thought had a chance of being obtainable, messages appeared telling me it was in the Beneath. The Beneath was essentially a mining dimension underneath the overworld. There, a variety of unique ores can be found, including the one I was looking for, that being magnesite. Once obtained, I cooked it into its catalyst form and finally made rubber. Now that I had rubber, I could finally get the ball rolling again. First off, I built the steam vacuum chamber and assembled the vacuum tubes. Next up, I built circuit boards out of sticky resin. Now, the last pieces required for the basic circuit were resistors, which were incredibly cheap, only requiring some paper, resin, copper, and coal dust. With all the components ready, I built the electronic circuit, propelling me into the LV age. That didn't finish the chapter though. I still needed to make my first LV machine, well, generator to be more precise. It wasn't that difficult to craft, only requiring 2 electric motors, which are essentially just iron rods and copper wire, the electric circuit, and some steel. And with that, Supersymmetry's second chapter is over. I kind of rushed towards the LV circuit, so I'll probably have to go back and polish up on side quests though.